I'm here with Evan. Evan is the country manager of Dynamic Yield. We've been friends for my whole career. So
in Japan.
Yeah, in Japan. And so today I'm hoping to kind of get some insight into what Dynamic Yield is, I think the broader scope, personalization, and then hopefully even get into maybe some exciting stuff that you guys are working on now. I think that let's take one step back from there though and kind of go into your career history, because I do think that that also presents an interesting story. I think I watched a podcast you're on recently and maybe let's start there.
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to sit down and chat with you. Thanks for the opportunity. And it's always a pleasure to be able to share some of these stories. And you know, I've been in Japan for almost 20 years now. So there are a lot of stories, there are a lot of learnings, and really, I'm not very good at learning from my mistakes, but somebody should. So if I have the chance to, relate some of this experience and somebody finds it helpful, then I'm very happy. My career has had its ups and downs and interesting evolutions, but it's landed me on the track to working at Dynamic Yield, which is an incredible company and very rewarding, and I'm very happy to be in this position now. So very looking forward to talking about that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and so you actually started kind of not in marketing, but there's been a constant theme of marketing throughout your whole career, and all the way even till now, where Dynamic Yield isn't necessarily an ad tech company, but there is a very heavy element of customer experience and kind of optimizing for those elements. And so for you, maybe what would you say has been like the marketing through line of your career? Like, would you say it's been like on the campaign side, on the brand side, the technology side?
Yeah, there has actually been this through line of marketing, sales, a little bit of advertising, but it really comes from my very first business experience and this sort of entrepreneurial mindset. I would say that my family is a very entrepreneurial family, and they've come at it in roundabout ways, but a lot of small business owners on both sides of my family. My father, when he initially finished school, he did so in the early 70s, and mom and dad were very much into kind of the living off the earth hippie movement, and he did a few different things, and then kind of some construction and that sort of thing, and then got into fishing. And so by the time I came along, he had a pretty nice boat, and he was established as a fisherman. And in those days in Canada, you could get a boat, as long as you had like a boat, a pickup truck, a distribution center, somewhere to freeze and store fish and that kind of stuff, you could get into owning your own business. And so as I was growing up, Dad had expanded into having this business, and he was quite successful. In fact, he'd pretty much paid off like the boat and the house and all of this stuff by the time I was in my teens. So I saw him being very successful in an incredibly rewarding business, and initially I wanted to follow his footsteps into that and go into fishing. And also I grew up in Vancouver on the West Coast and grew up on the water. When I was really young, we were probably on the boat more than on the land. And I certainly tried to get on the boat every chance I could because I loved it. But it was this, seeing Dad craft this real independent career and having this freedom aspect to his work and real work-life balance that was inspiring. So I initially, again, thought that I was going to, kind of work my way up through being a deckhand on the boats to getting my own fish boat. But just as I was ready to really seriously get into that career path, as I was finishing high school, the government made a bunch of changes to the industry. In 1997, the year I graduated high school, they changed the entire coast. The entire West Coast was divided up into these little areas and over-regulated, and they changed the types of gear that we could use and stuff. So that was just, that whole career path really felt like it was taken away. And so I went into college, and I was working in retail, selling like mobile phones and that kind of thing, and then to help pay for school. So I got into the sort of the world of sales. And initially, I really liked like electronics and devices and that sort of thing. When I was a kid, I really enjoyed making things, working with my hands. And I thought, well, I like building stuff. I like electronics. Technology's cool. By 98, 99, the dot-com boom and all this stuff was going on. So I thought I'd be an engineer, but I didn't know what kind of engineer I'd be. So initially I thought the coolest thing that I could do would be to build like these renewable energy hydrogen cars. And at that time, Ballard Fuel Systems was taking off in Vancouver. So I thought, okay, I'm going to be like a mechanical engineer. And then I in school, I got to like the calculus part of engineering, and I realized, no, that's not for me. But I thought, well, okay, maybe I can shift gears and be more like on the business track rather than the technology engineering track. Maybe I can help build and maybe own businesses that build these cool things. So I had this idea of getting into like business and sales and marketing, and I continued on with that retail sales, working a lot of like nights and weekends and stuff while I was in school, and then I shifted in school to studying business and marketing. So by the time I graduated, I'd gotten a pretty decent foundation in like business admin and marketing, and this is around early 2000s, right? So marketing at that time was like, this is how you do direct mail, and here's how you take out a newspaper advertisement, and
just out of home.
yeah. And so I had this vague idea of how a marketing agency would work and that kind of thing, or how advertising worked. And it was still almost like Mad Men era concepts. But we also did a little bit of this is how you would code a website. Like here's this thing called HTML, and here's how you write, basic web page and stuff, and here's how you would send out an email and this kind of stuff. So there are some digital components to what we were studying in those days. And one of my classmates actually had an internet business. He had this restaurant finder business, like pre-Yelp. So that was inspiring. And this guy was making a lot of money, even when we were in school, with this internet business. So all of these ideas and sort of gestated, and I had this idea that I wanted to go out and see the world. And I'd been fishing I think the year I finished high school was the year I went tuna fishing, and I went way down to like, Northern California, way out into, halfway out to Hawaii and stuff, into the Pacific for a month at a time, catching these tuna. And I really enjoyed the traveling, and I thought, I want to keep going. I want to go, see the whole world, and I'm going to find some ways to pay for that. So the first idea I had was, I'm just going to keep going across the Pacific to Japan, and when I get there, maybe I can find a way to bring over more of like my dad's salmon and find a more direct distribution route for that. And maybe I can like use my marketing skills to market Canadian seafood. So that was the first idea. And I had a love interest who I'd met in school, who I had come back to Japan, and I wanted to see her. So I first came to northern Japan, Hokkaido, closest port actually to Vancouver, so all the seafood was coming that way. And I spent a year working with Jetro and trying to get that project going. Not really to any success, because there was a lot of like government lobbying and stuff that was required for that, and it was a very heavy lift without speaking any Japanese. One thing I learned when I got to Japan is that people don't really speak English, or didn't really speak very much English at that time, certainly not in northern Japan. And there weren't very many other foreigners around at that time either. So I kind of took that idea of marketing, and in the first year that wasn't going so well. I had to pay the bills, so I got into English teaching, as many people do. And I worked at Japan's largest English school chain at the time, which was undergoing like some management difficulties, and we could see that although they had a good business model, they were suffering from poor mismanagement. So after the first year of doing that, I took what I thought worked about that English school business, and then I built my own English school and tried to improve on it to pretty good success. It was a good business, and for a few years, I got married to that first girl that I'd met in school. And for a few years, my wife and I ran this English school, and it went pretty well. But I also was able to expand the school through that same theme of marketing, because I was building a website for the school, and I started basic social media, Twitter, and then Facebook when it became open to people other than Harvard students. And I had this real interest in the early stage technology, and I was applying it to the school, and it was growing pretty well. Some of my students started to see what I was doing in terms of marketing the school and stuff, and they asked if I could market their businesses as well. So some of the students that I had at the English school had their own businesses. There were some interesting companies producing products that I thought would be interesting for the rest of the world. So we started applying these boutique sort of marketing ideas to these local products, local businesses, and taking them internationally. Sold the school, formally shifted into having a marketing agency with a Japanese business partner. That business partner had some local connections that got us into some government work, and that led into the government-sponsored inbound tourism initiatives. So before we knew it, we're benefiting from like the Niseko resort boom that happened in northern Japan, and then it was like all of a sudden we were working with the Hilton Hotel and then YTL Hotels, and things are really taking off, and so it was quite an interesting trajectory, but it was a matter of trying to stay ahead of the technology, right? So I didn't really know how to build like a Google, SEM campaign. I didn't really understand how to make advertising campaigns and stuff. So I had to study about it. And there was no study path at that time except to like Google it and figure it out. So it was literally every night I would study up on something and get some new ideas. And then I'd go pitch this to clients. I'd be like, okay, we've got your multilingual website, and we've got this thing called Google Analytics that shows people are coming from like these different channels. And some people searched for this kind of a keyword, and then they came to your website, and we could make more keywords like that in what's called a search engine optimization campaign. And the client would be like, oh yeah, that sounds cool. Yeah, let's do that. Let's do that. And they'd be like, okay, great. We'll start this. And then I'd go home that night and learn how to do that. And so, it was this process of just literally, I'd be like one page ahead in the textbook trying to sell what came, on the page before. And that's how you did it. You just figured stuff out as you went. And I would say even now, there isn't really that much of a formal study path to get into digital marketing. And also the technology moves so quickly that you have to do this. You have to study. Constantly, like we've done. We've gotten together and shared information and ideas and stuff over the years, and that's how you learn. You expand your personal network, and you just be open to learning from every source that you can, and you do a lot of self-study. You have to. We're lucky in that these self-study tracks have gotten better and better. I mean, Google now, if you want to learn about Google Analytics, they have a whole online course. You can get a certificate. It's like going to university online. So it makes it easier than it was in 2006, 2007 when I was doing this. But it was a path to a career essentially in digital marketing that I was able to follow to some success. Now it was kind of a heavy lift for a foreigner who's living in northern Japan, whose Japanese is still pretty basic. Within the first 3 years, I was getting to the point where I could start managing client pitches and stuff in Japanese, but it was still a bit of a struggle, right? I developed a pretty good vocabulary about how to sell like SEO and that kind of thing, but I couldn't talk about like the weather very well or carry on a conversation. So specific. Yeah, I literally learned Japanese through the process of doing it for business. So it was sink or swim, and that's all I learned. But it got better over time. So after doing the marketing agency for a while, I realized that it was rewarding, but we were kind of hitting a wall in that in Japan, if you're selling services, there's a maximum scalability there because time is quite difficult to value very highly and to sell very well in Japan. This is partly because Japan has such a white glove services culture where you must meet the needs of your clients to keep them happy. And although Japan really values harmony and people don't like to people would never complain in like daily conversation or something. But there's this culture where in Japan, the client or the customer is not king. The customer is God. And if they say they want something, they will say it as if they were God. Like the most, quiet, humble, nicest person you know will sort of, cause you to work extremely hard, midnight on a Sunday, no problem. If they need something done, a report or something like that on Monday morning, you will get it done, or you will suffer the wrath of God. And because of that, you can't work in a normal like sort of 9 to 5 or 9 to 6 workflow. You have to work constantly to exceed expectations. That is the business, or there isn't any business. So that takes your billable dollar amount down to the point where it's almost like minimum wage levels if you're trying to sell services, sell time. The only way to get around that is to supplement that then with something else. So you have to do media placement, or you have to sell part of a license fee for software or something like that. So I realized that with the agency, and I realized that I had to get more into understanding the technology. So I mentioned Google Analytics earlier. I realized that we needed to formalize that and package our services around it, and be selling either part of that type of software or some other software. And we created this whole suite of different software that we would essentially purchase a seat in, and then wrap our services around it, and then pass that consulting on to the various clients that we had.
That's super interesting, actually, because I feel like that's a business model that is still replicated now by like a lot of the bigger agencies. Like that's very similar to like
it is, and that's how it works all the way up to the largest agencies like Dentsu. Now they have very complex ecosystems with a lot of different pieces, and the value add that they bring to their customers is their ability to navigate that ecosystem, to bring all the players together, the relationships that they have. And then the fact that they own so much of the media, and then for other agencies they have different niches. Like in Japan, there's basically 3 major agency silos. There's Dentsu, Hakuhodo, Asatsuki, ADK, and then there are a lot of companies that work within or somewhat across those silos to a certain degree, but they're within that ecosystem somewhere. And then there's the external agencies that kind of come in and they can somewhat subvert that model, but they're quite niche in what they're able to do, even large agencies. So you're correct in that's the hybridized sort of model that works even right now. But what works even better is if you're lessening the services component and increasing the software component, because it just adds efficiency. And a lot of the work that can be done by agencies can actually now be done with software. And there's a huge value add that comes when you start to remove a lot of the sort of the grunt work, like making reports or just digging through pages and pages of Excel sheets to understand the insights. Like what does this traffic really mean? Like, these people are coming from this traffic source, and then they're looking at this page, and then they're just kind of leaving the website. What should we do about that? Now there are tools that will automatically parse that data and allow you to bring actionable insights to your customer in a much more efficient way. So when I was running that agency, we focused on trying to improve those efficiencies. And then I hit upon this idea that the ultimate business model is to try and remove the services down to just supporting a single product and essentially become a software development company developing one product. And we actually had essentially developed a product without really realizing it, because we had been building these multilingual websites for tourism destinations and then realized that we had a common architecture. And if we templatized the architecture and then hosted it in a cloud server and could just run a script to do an install and assign it to a domain name and then have the customer put in their logo and their images and everything, then they would basically customize their own website on our website builder. Anybody listening to that today would think I just described like a Wix or a Squarespace or like a modern version
Even
of
Google Sites or something.
yeah, Google Sites, exactly. So those site builders based on a CMS, they're pretty common now, but at that time, 2009, 2010, it was really a lot of like do-it-yourself WordPress, figure out the hosting component. And so we just, we were a little bit ahead of the curve in these website builders and CMS. And we took what we had and we, kind of packaged it and streamlined it a bit and called that the tourism builder software. And so we shifted, in fact, I closed the agency and shifted into a new company. So I'd formed, what's in Japan called a kabushiki gaisha, a shareholders company. I formed a new one for this tourism builder project. But it was a lot of the same old components. And actually what was funding the thing was still the marketing side of the business, because we had some long-term contracts where we were providing our services around this software. So in 2010, I think I'd done a roadshow and I'd gotten some early like angel investment, and I'd gotten to where we could afford to hire a development team and designers and focus just on really building this nice software. And then I was out, trying to sell this to government organizations, which at that time meant literally driving all over Hokkaido and then all over Japan, and literally knocking on doors. I was selling software by knocking on government agency doors. It sounds sort of counterintuitive, but there's this advantage that you have as somebody who's very different in this culture. As a foreigner, or the colloquialism is gaijin, not that politically correct a term, but as a gaijin, you're literally an outsider. And sometimes that allows you to jump past gatekeepers.
I totally understand that. I feel like I use that a lot in my day-to-day, actually.
Yeah, I mean, the slang for it is the gaijin smash. So in Japanese, door-to-door sales is still a pretty common technique. It's called tobikomi eigyo, right? So you're out there flying around, tobikomi, jumping from one door to another, trying to do eigyo or sales. So I was doing this, literally driving into these little tourism destinations, finding out where the shiakusho, which is the city office or the tourism office was. And I would go in, full on suit, even in the middle of summer, dark colored suit and tie. And I'd walk right in, and they have these long corridors with all of the different names of the different departments on them. And I learned the kanji for like the tourism department at the city office. And so I'd walk in, and they're all open. You can kind of go in there, and I'd go and I'd stand at the desk until somebody made eye contact with me. And I'd basically say, in my best Japanese, yeah, I'm here to talk about your tourism website. And it would be like, dropping a rock into a goldfish pond. Everybody would scatter and run around. And finally, they'd pull some guy up to the desk and say, here's Tanaka, he's in charge of the website. And I'd launch into a sales pitch. But I was able to do that because they didn't know that I was there for sales. They assumed that I'd been referred by somebody, or I was there for some reason. And so I kind of did this, a very, very polite version of the gaijin smash. And it worked. It worked enough that I was able to start selling the software. We built a few websites on the software, and then we got more and more referrals, and word of mouth started to spread. And then other agencies would kind of pull our technology into their pitches, and we would we got some pretty big websites. There are several prefectures around Japan whose official tourism sites were still built on our software at the beginning. But by early 2011, I was really invested in this, and I thought, okay, this is great. It's going to go well. I have to hire all these people, and we need to expand the software so that it's multilingual. We got to do this in English and Korean and French and Spanish. And I started building out this team, and we did have at that time, I think, to the best of my knowledge anyway, the largest multinational, multicultural, multilingual agency in all of northern Japan, developing this software as well as providing the services. And then in March of 2011, that big earthquake and resulting tsunami and nuclear fallout hit, and none of those people really wanted to hang around and see what happened when the radiation got to us. And they were concerned, and so most of that team went back to their home countries. Obviously, all tourism stopped, and the entire source of funding this whole thing dried up. There wasn't, radiation never came to northern Hokkaido and all that stuff. It didn't actually happen, but there was a concern. And so, there was this natural disaster that came and just kind of wiped out that business. But I refused to give up. And so for another, I think 18 months or something, I kept trying to keep it going. And so I used up all of the seed investment that we'd raised. I used up all the funds that we had left over from the marketing agency. Then I used up all of my money. And at one point, my wife said, I can't do this anymore, so goodbye, good luck. And I went forward on my own. And then it just got to a point where I had been so stubborn and so fixated on being able to power through, because I'd been kind of successful up to that point, right? Like I'd started these different businesses, they'd gone pretty well. So I thought I can power through this, willpower will get me through. I woke up one morning and I realized that everything had reached a point where I couldn't go on any further. I'd been like sleeping under my desk, basically living in the office, and now it was empty. There was nothing left. So I had enough money, or no, actually I didn't have enough money. I had to sell the desk. I think I got like 10,000 yen at a recycle shop for the desk and maybe some chairs or something. And so I had just enough money to buy a plane ticket, one of these cheap domestic plane tickets, and fly to Tokyo. And I picked up a little bit of client work, and I just kind of couch surfed for a while until I could get back on my feet. And there were a couple of times where I didn't have a place, and I wound up just carrying this big computer around and having to sleep in the park a couple of times on top of the big box for the computer. So that was a full reset, and I really evaluated what I wanted to do with my career. Like, should I go back to Canada? I had really nothing left at the time. But then I started evaluating, and I started getting emails as well. I'd go to like cafes to use the Wi-Fi and check my email, and I started to get like customer inquiries, and there was this interest in continuing on with like the marketing services. And I thought, okay, I've learned so much. Like I've figured out how to navigate starting a company in Japan, actually providing service in this really difficult market. I've solved so many problems here. I'm kind of invested in this market, and I still saw a lot of problems that needed solving. Like, even at that time, this is like 2011, 2012. I guess, no, by that time it was 2013. 2013 when I first made that move to Tokyo and started really evaluating what was going on. And I thought, Japan is now at this point where the population is declining and it needs to undergo digital transformation. And I can do that. I can help with that. So I talked to some advisors and stuff, and one of them said, well, I know the CEO of a large digital marketing firm in Japan, and actually he knows you. He'd seen me on stage pitching my startup idea on this roadshow that I did down in Kyoto or somewhere, and he liked your energy and enthusiasm and the fact that you were pitching in Japanese, because by that time I'd refined the pitch enough that I could do it in Japanese pretty well. And he said, yeah, he'd like to work with you. We don't know what you would do at the agency, but go talk to him. So I met with the CEO, and then I met with their board of directors, and they said, yeah, please, come and join our team here, and we'll figure out what you're good for. Which, by the way, is pretty common when joining a Japanese company. Most Japanese organizations they don't really hire specialists. They hire people that will become a part of that team, that look like they'll be good team players, and then they tend to move people through each part of the organization. So regardless of what you studied in school, you might be the best salesman there ever was, but you're going to do some time as an accountant. Yeah. Or you might be excelling, hitting your numbers as a salesperson, and you're suddenly going to get shifted over into marketing or some other department because they want you to understand the whole organization. It's less so like that maybe in the agency world than it is in a traditional like manufacturing company.
Even Rakuten, though, I know they do that a lot with their like
Sure.
new grads. Yeah.
Yeah. And again, the idea is that it's a team. That team play is what makes Japanese companies so strong. Japanese management principles are all based on sort of harmonious team decision making. And so to be able to make good decisions, you should be able to empathize with the rest of the team, which means you should understand the entire organization. You shouldn't be totally siloed into doing just one thing. So I joined this company not knowing exactly what I was going to do, because I had this marketing background and I thought that I could assist with digital marketing and transformation. They put me into the marketing department of a digital marketing agency. And the first project was to localize the website. So that's where I started. But after a couple of weeks of doing that, I saw that this technology partner, Optimizely, A/B testing technology, was coming to Japan to do their first training with a big customer. And while there, they wanted to meet with all of their partners and sort of get a better footprint in the Japanese market. And so I asked around and found out that actually this agency that I was at, E-Agency, had a reseller partnership or some sort of agreement in place, because they'd gone overseas to San Diego or somewhere and met Optimizely at a trade show and then thought, this is interesting technology, let's bring it to Japan. But there was one person who'd sort of been leading that charge and then got busy with other stuff, and so it hadn't really gone anywhere. I think we'd talked to a few customers about it at that time. But I thought this is a great opportunity, and I knew the technology. I'd actually used it at my agency a little bit. So I went and met these guys at the airport when they flew in from San Francisco. I met them at Haneda Airport, and then I showed them around Tokyo and helped organize meetings with other partners and stuff. And based on that sort of personal connection that we generated, that agency became the #1 reseller partner for them in Japan. And then I shifted into the sales department, and then eventually I said, like, the way to do this, to really sell this software in Japan, is to learn from how they're selling it in the States and then apply that model to the Japanese model. Now, for context, if you've ever sold anything in Japan, you probably know that it's only recently through like Oracle and Salesforce and that influence coming to Japan that there's been a data-based, CRM-based workflow where you have a sales pipeline and you have a way to track the sales motions and as well as marketing motions and understand how things are moving through that pipeline and then how customers are renewing and continuing. That whole generation of what's called a sales and marketing flywheel, that was quite a new concept that really came into the market with Salesforce, but when I was building this, it was still pretty new. The traditional method of doing sales in Japan is relationship-based. Yeah. And so you develop a great deal of time and energy and your company's resources into having good relationships with your clients. And that might mean, after hours, going for drinks and karaoke and the whole nightlife ecosystem that's built up around every business area in Japan is there to support, the day-to-day business, because you have your meetings through the day, which are all about consensus building. And then if you want to find out what actually happened in that meeting, you have to go meet your client for a drink so that he can, or he or she can tell you what was actually going on, right? Because one very interesting aspect of doing business in Japan is that because the society is so homogenous, communication in many ways is almost like a form of telepathy. You'll get 20 people in a room and it seems like nothing's being said. But there are subtle cues like tone of voice and eye contact or the lack of it and a general sort of these different subtle cues. And if you can read those really well, read the air, which is in Japanese called kuki o yomu, right? Literally read the air. If you can do that well, you can kind of get an idea of whether a deal is moving forward or not. But to really understand what's happening, you have to talk to your contact at the other organization, usually over drinks. Or these days, in the age of COVID, because we're not meeting for drinks anymore, what you really want to do is connect on like Line or an instant messenger, so you can communicate, one-on-one. In a more casual environment without there being an email record that the company is going to see. And this is necessary because the meeting isn't about making decisions. The meeting is about it's usually about presenting decisions that were already made, but not in a very concrete way. It's sort of what you do is you get everybody in your organization together and you build consensus. And once you think you have consensus, you go and you present that to the other party, and then you present it quite softly and you sort of gauge their reaction. Then you go back and see, what do you think they meant? And you do some more consensus building. And then eventually, a deal gets made and there's a relationship. And then you start the process again for the next year's renewal of that deal or whatever. So all of this is based on a harmonious method of doing business based on, Confucian principles, where harmony of society is the ultimate ideal. But it's not just about whether you are doing business with this company or not. It's also about what all your competitors are doing. Because unlike business in the West, you're not always looking to get more market share, because that would be disharmonious. You'd be stepping on people's toes. So if there's an advantage and it doesn't look like everybody else is going to get too upset about you taking it, you can take that advantage. But it has to be, done according to the correct parameters and so on.
So funny. Yeah, I understand where you're coming from 100%. Like, I think something that comes up a lot, even when we're talking to our clients about how they develop business, it's always like the first question they get is usually, who else is using this? Like, who else, like, what are the other companies in the market that are using it? And if no one else is using it, they're like, that's not for us right now. Come back to us when we have more.
Exactly. We'll circle back to that in a minute because it's such an important point. But it is very necessary to have consensus within the organization, and trying something that's too new can be perceived as too risky. It's very hard to get consensus for that. But to keep with this theme of why I chose this sort of marketing path, it's because there was always a problem that I saw needed to be solved and that I thought I could solve it. So when it was helping this tech partner Optimizely come into the market, I first of all saw a way for us as an agency to help sell them. And then I saw a way for us as an agency to develop a sales process that was a little bit closer to the American model of using a CRM, tracking the motions, and assigning people, okay, you're going to be an SDR, a sales development representative, and you're going to focus on getting the early stage meetings and qualifying the leads that marketing is going to send to us. And when you book a meeting, you're going to schedule it with this AE or account executive, or that might be called a SD sales director. And then that person's going to go and do the demo and move them through the process. And then they're going to get handed over to customer service. And there's, we mapped it all out. This is what we want to do. And all right, Tanaka-san, you're going to do this part. And Suzuki-san, why don't you try doing this part? We'll see if you like that or not. So I helped to build this idea based on the CRM system about how the sales process would work, hybridized for the Japanese market, and in tune with this need to focus on the relationship building and everything that makes it work in the Japanese market. And then what I started to see is that a couple of years went by, and that was pretty successful. We did that for a few other software products as well. And then that agency actually started to see the same sort of necessary evolution that I'd seen at my own agency, and they started to shift away from selling other people's products to developing their own products. So initially it was like, we've got this software that does this, and there's this software that does this, but here in Japan, they don't really communicate so well together, so we'll create this software to bridge them. And then as that grew, it became, well, actually, we don't need this piece anymore. We're going to replace this with our own. And eventually they started building out their own ecosystem of products that they could sell as SaaS products, which I think was a great and very natural evolution. And I also kind of felt that I'd perfected the formula for the sales team, and now they could apply that to selling their own products, and my work there was done. And I wanted to, take what I'd learned and go on to the next challenge, which for me was taking that formula about how to enter the Japanese market and helping other companies to do that same thing. So while I was working at the one agency, I started to get inquiries from other like advertising agencies about how to use data, how do we do this digital transformation. So I did some time working at J. Walter Thompson, which was the oldest foreign ad agency in Japan. They've been in Tokyo since 1955. And they had a very good portfolio of clients who were very keen to understand more about how to use data. So I did some consulting with their basically R&D works division about how to use big data for some of their clients, created some theoretical data modeling and that sort of thing together with that team. But then I saw that what really probably would solve the biggest need in Japan at this time, we're now getting up to around 2016, 2017, would be tech companies that could come in with solutions that solved a lot of the workflow issues that Japan was having. And so I shifted more into consulting as a market entry advisor. And I also at the same time revived that Tourism Builder software startup. We'd had to shut it down, but the lead developer had kept the code base, and there had been advancements in the industry that allowed us to start that up again on the side. So we tried to get that going again, and I left eAgency full-time, shifted to a part-time contract, went back into working on the Tourism Builder, and then doing this market entry consulting. For the market entry consulting, it was really all MarTech. Because that's what I knew, and that's what I thought there was the biggest advantage in this market for. Culturally, one reason why there's such an advantage for this is that Japan actually doesn't have that much of a history of marketing. So it has a very strong history of relationship-based sales, a great history of advertising, really interesting creative advertising. And today, some of it might seem a little bit silly and
totally, yeah, I know exactly.
banal. The fact that it's certainly unique. Yeah, every other TV ad in Japan has to have some kind of choreographed dance or a character. But it's its own form of creativity, and it's extremely effective. But marketing, not so much. I mean. One of my senpai or advisors, a very interesting character who's been in Japan for a long time, Bob-san. You probably know Bob-san.
I think I've met him a couple times, but yeah.
Well, he actually wrote a book on marketing in Japan, and he pointed out that there is no native Japanese word for marketing. Unlike sales, which is eigyo, or advertising, which is kokoku. In Japanese, marketing is just the English word. Katakana-sized, marketing, right? So that implies that it's a foreign concept, and at least a relatively new concept. And I think that's true. I don't think there's a strong understanding and a strong history of what marketing exactly is. And I think there's a need for better marketing, and I think there's certainly a growing need for marketing technology that helps to automate a lot of the processes or kind of help bridge some of the gaps in this understanding about how to market effectively. And that's necessary not just to better sell and promote products within Japan, but for any Japanese company that wants to expand internationally. And this is quite difficult for a lot of Japanese companies to do. It sounds sort of surprising if you look at the successes of Toyota and Panasonic and Sony and some of the even Dentsu, which is now an international agency. If you look at the history of the successes, that might seem surprising, but those are outliers. Most Japanese brands have a really difficult time adapting everything that they've created for the domestic market and making that work overseas, because it's totally different. It's a huge gap there. I focused on this technology that I could help bring into Japan that would solve some of these issues. And more I saw a need for focusing on automation and AI and machine learning. While I'd been working to sell Optimizely, they had been moving in that direction more towards AI. And this is such a need for Japan because one of the biggest problems that we kept running into selling marketing technology is that there was actually a lack of people who knew how to implement and then run and service the technology, because there's a lack of front-end engineers. And traditionally in Japan, if you're in marketing, you're probably in marketing or advertising, you probably gravitated towards that because you had an interest in creativity. It's more like the Mad Men version of getting into that advertising where you're storyboarding and you're pitching ideas and that sort of thing. Even within those companies that are shifting employees around from one department to another, if you're kind of shifted into the marketing department, you probably didn't come there with much of an engineering background. So there's this kind of clear division between people who can code and people who can't. Those who can code are usually strictly within the engineering department and they're developing products. Japan has a lot of great back-end engineers, and I think this is partly because Japan is so good at tangibles, and back-end engineering, server-side engineering has practical applications to the manufacturing world as well. But marketing is much more about the intangible, the internet world, and coding, for websites and these much more just intangible things that I think it's harder for most people to sort of wrap their heads around in Japan. So to fill that need, I saw that we could bring in technology like marketing automation, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. This type of technology would close some of the gaps and allow people with just a few small teams, maybe a little bit understaffed companies even, to be able to better do this type of marketing and increase their overall business. And the government noticed this as well. Around the same time that I was starting to refocus my career on this, the government launched what they call the Abe government launched the Society 5.0 initiative, which is the concept that society has gone through different iterations, from the earliest versions of agriculture to the industrial age to the early information age, and that we're now moving into Society 5.0, which is very much into the information age, but information applied to the daily life. So with an aging and also declining population, Japan faces a productivity issue. The only way to maintain its status as the world's third largest GDP is to make the existing workforce more and more productive as they decline. One way to do this is to apply technology and to have AI and automation come in and basically replace those people who are now declining in the workforce. And now this is very interesting for somebody who's targeted their career, oriented their career around AI and machine learning and efficiency and automation. Japan is actually the first place where we get to apply these technologies, but we're not taking anybody's jobs because the people were already declining. Right?
It's actually a solve versus something that's impending.
It's very clearly coming in and solving pain points, as opposed to kind of the theoretical application of look, in North America, for example, self-driving trucks. It would if they came in overnight, they would put a huge percentage of the workforce out of work and cause societal issues. Well, in Japan, that workforce is declining to the point where they just can't get enough people to drive trucks at this point, right? So it's much more an immediate need and immediate application. And we're going through a part where almost all developing nations do have a plateauing or declining population. And so around much of the rest of Northern Europe and North America, in the coming decades, we'll have the same thing, where we need this automation and efficiency to come in and solve these actual society issues. But Japan is the testing ground to that. So if anybody wants to future-proof their career for the next 20 years, focusing on AI, automation, machine learning, this will absolutely ensure that they're solving an actual pain point, an actual issue, and it will ensure that their career path is beneficial to society and rewarding to them. I would say at least for the next 20 years or so. So that brings us pretty much up to date. After doing a few rounds of these market entry consulting projects where I helped technology companies determine whether they would be a good fit in this market or not, one of them decided that it is a good fit, that they want to invest in this market, and so they've hired me to be the country manager. And that brings us up to today, where I am the country manager for Dynamic Yield, which is the world's leading personalization experience optimization software. And we're helping mostly e-commerce, fashion, retail, luxury companies improve their customer experience online and allow them to meet their customer needs in a much more efficient manner with even with quite small teams.
That's amazing.